8 terrifying true Appalachian mountain stories of the unknown. Welcome back to Macabre Chronicle. Tonight we journey into the Appalachian Mountains, where the veil between our world and something far more sinister grows dangerously thin. You'll witness accounts of shadow figures that speak your name, abandoned structures that exist outside normal space, and valleys where time itself fractures. If you like true Appalachian mysteries, consider subscribing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. These accounts come from people who lived them. These stories are grounded in eyewitness testimonies and local oral traditions collected from hikers, search and rescue teams, and researchers across the mountain chain. These accounts, recorded from hikers, researchers, and locals, reveal a pattern of recurring unexplained phenomena across the Appalachians. These aren't your typical missing person cases. These are encounters with something that shouldn't exist, yet undeniably does. The Shadow Walker of Ravens Hollow. Our first account comes from James, a 26-year-old experienced hiker who chose the remote trails near Elkridge, North Carolina, for what he intended as a solo reset trip after a difficult breakup. The area north of Devil's Thread Gap offered the isolation he craved, with dense forest canopy and minimal foot traffic. For the first 2 days, his camping experience proceeded exactly as planned. He established his campsite in a small clearing, enjoyed peaceful evenings by his portable camp stove, and felt the therapeutic effects of disconnecting from civilization. On the third night, everything changed. James woke around midnight to an unmistakable chemical odor seeping through his tent walls. The smell combined the metallic tang of fresh blood with the sharp, acrid burn of battery acid, creating a nauseating mixture that made his eyes water. He lay motionless in his sleeping bag, listening to the forest sounds when he heard deliberate footsteps circling his tent. The steps moved slowly, methodically, completing one full circle around his campsite before stopping directly outside his tent entrance. The footsteps possessed an unnatural quality that distinguished them from any wildlife James had encountered during his years of hiking. Each step landed with precise, measured timing, suggesting intelligence and purpose rather than the random movements of nocturnal animals. The entity paused at his tent entrance for several minutes, during which James could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then came a single deliberate tap against the tent fabric near where his head rested, followed by complete silence. James remained frozen inside his tent until dawn, afraid to investigate the source of the disturbance. When morning light finally provided enough visibility, he discovered smooth, leather-soled footprints circling his campsite. The prints showed remarkable detail, revealing an old-fashioned shoe sole with toes turned distinctly inward, creating an unnatural gait pattern. Most disturbing was the complete absence of heel impressions, as if whatever made the tracks walked only on the balls of its feet. Following the footprint trail, James discovered an abandoned hunting shack roughly 50 yards from his campsite. The weathered structure appeared to have been unused for decades, with rotting floorboards and collapsed sections of roof. Inside the shack, carved into the wooden wall with obvious care and precision, were dozens of names spanning what appeared to be several decades based on the varying degrees of weathering in the wood. The names included full first and last names, some with dates, arranged in neat rows across the interior wall. What chilled James most was discovering a blank space at the bottom of the carved list, as if waiting for the next addition. The space was positioned perfectly below the existing names, with knife marks around its edges suggesting someone had prepared the area for future carving. The implications of this discovery, combined with his midnight encounter, created an overwhelming sense of being selected or marked for something he couldn't understand. Cherokee oral traditions throughout the Appalachian region describe shadow beings that monitor human activity in sacred or protected areas. These entities appear in various forms but consistently demonstrate awareness of individual human identities, often knowing names and personal details about their encounters. Local families have passed down warnings about specific mountain areas where these watchers maintain their vigil, cautioning against camping alone in certain hollows and ridges. Park rangers and local law enforcement have compiled unofficial reports of similar encounters throughout the region, though these accounts rarely appear in official documentation. The reports describe consistent patterns: the chemical odor, the deliberate circling behavior, and the discovery of smooth-soled footprints that appear to belong to footwear from earlier historical periods. Multiple witnesses have reported finding carved names in abandoned structures following their encounters, suggesting a long-term pattern of documentation by unknown entities. James packed his equipment immediately after discovering the hunting shack and hiked directly to his vehicle without stopping for his planned final day. The psychological impact of his experience proved lasting and severe. Within a week of returning home, he sold all his hiking and camping gear, ending a hobby that had defined much of his adult life. He has never returned to any Appalachian trail system and refuses to discuss the specific details of what he heard during those silent minutes when the entity stood outside his tent. The most unsettling aspect of James's account lies in the methodical nature of the encounter. The precise circling, the single deliberate tap, and the prepared space for another carved name suggest a systematic process rather than a random supernatural event. This implies intelligence, purpose, and most disturbingly, the continuation of activities that have apparently been occurring for decades in these remote mountain areas. Historical records from the region document missing hikers and campers dating back to the 1800s, with many disappearances occurring in the same general area where James encountered his midnight visitor. Local search and rescue teams acknowledge certain locations where solo hikers simply vanish without leaving any trace, despite extensive search efforts and favorable weather conditions. James's experience represents just one documented encounter in a region where the boundary between the natural and supernatural appears dangerously thin. But his midnight visitor was not the only entity in these mountains that demonstrates intimate knowledge of human identity. Some encounters involve beings that move through impossible spaces and speak with voices that should not exist. The Whispering Stones of Devil's Backbone Ridge. Dr. Sarah Chen's geological survey team discovered the stone formations along Devil's Backbone Ridge during a routine mineral assessment in western North Carolina. The team had been documenting rock compositions for 3 days when they noticed something unusual about a cluster of granite monoliths arranged in a rough circle near the ridge's highest point. These stones, weathered by centuries of mountain storms, produced faint sounds that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of human breathing. The sounds occurred most frequently during early morning hours and again near sunset when the temperature differential between the stones and surrounding air was most pronounced. What distinguished these sounds from typical geological phenomena was their response to human proximity. When team members approached within 10 feet of the stone circle, the barely audible whispers became noticeably clearer, rising in volume and complexity. Dr. Chen noted that the sounds seemed to emanate from within the stones themselves rather than from wind passing over their surfaces. Each team member reported hearing slightly different variations of the sounds, as if the stones were tailoring their whispers to individual listeners. The breakthrough moment came when linguistics graduate student Mark Torres noticed phonetic patterns in the repeated syllables. What had initially seemed like random atmospheric noise resolved into structured sounds that suggested organized speech. Torres spent hours recording the whispers with specialized audio equipment, later analyzing the recordings to identify consistent patterns and repeated formations. The dialect bore no resemblance to any known Native American language or European settler tongue documented in the region. The team's unease deepened when they began to recognize fragments of the whispered communications. The stones appeared to reference intimate personal history about each listener, speaking about childhood events, family secrets, and private fears that no one else could possibly know. Dr. Chen heard whispers about her grandmother's death when she was 12 years old, including specific details about the hospital room and her grandmother's final words that she had never shared with anyone. Team member Rebecca Walsh reported hearing references to a miscarriage she had suffered years earlier, described in the exact medical terminology her doctor had used. Extended exposure to the Whispering Stones produced consistent physical symptoms among all team members. After spending more than 2 hours near the formations, every person developed severe nosebleeds that lasted for hours and resisted typical treatment methods. The blood appeared darker than normal and contained unusual mineral deposits that resembled the granite composition of the stones themselves. Team members also experienced profound disorientation, with several individuals becoming lost within the familiar survey area despite having GPS equipment and clear weather conditions. The nightmares began on the second night of their survey work. Every team member reported vivid dreams featuring the stone circle, but the dreams showed the area as it had appeared decades or centuries earlier. In these dreams, the team members witnessed historical events they couldn't possibly have knowledge of, including specific conversations between people who had lived and died generations before their birth. Dr. Chen dreamed of a Cherokee ceremony conducted around the stones in the 1820s, complete with detailed ritual practices and names of participants that she later found referenced in historical documents. Local families throughout the Devil's Backbone region have maintained oral traditions about these particular stone formations for over 2 centuries. 3 generations of the Calloway family, whose property borders the ridge, refer to the site as the place where the dead still speak. The family maintains that their ancestors learned to avoid the stones after dark, when the whispers grow loud enough to be heard from considerable distances. Elizabeth Calloway described how her great-grandfather warned that anyone who listened too closely to the stones would begin hearing voices of deceased relatives, leading to madness or worse. The team's research uncovered disturbing connections between the whispering phenomena and historical disappearances in the area. County records from the 1800s document 17 missing persons cases within a 5-mile radius of Devil's Backbone Ridge. Each disappearance occurred during the same seasonal periods when the stone whispers are most active. More troubling, several of these missing persons had been heard talking to themselves near the stone formations in the days before their disappearances, according to witness statements preserved in courthouse archives. Multiple witnesses across different decades have reported hearing the stones speak in the voices of deceased family members. Local resident Thomas Mitchell described sitting near the formations in 1987 and hearing his dead father's voice calling his name from within the granite structures. The voice provided information about family financial troubles that his father could only have known before his death, yet the problems had developed months after the funeral. Similar accounts exist from the 1990s and early 2000s, all describing conversations with deceased relatives who demonstrated knowledge of current events despite their deaths. This phenomenon extends beyond Devil's Backbone Ridge to similar stone circles throughout the Appalachian Range. Comparable reports exist from sites in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, Tennessee's Cumberland Mountains, and Pennsylvania's Allegheny region. Each location features ancient stone formations that produce unexplained sounds, demonstrate awareness of human presence, and seem to possess knowledge about visitors' personal histories. The consistency of these reports across hundreds of miles suggests a broader pattern of activity throughout the mountain chain. The most unsettling discovery emerged when team members compared the stone's whispers to subsequent events in their lives. Dr. Chen's recordings contained references to a promotion she would receive 6 months later, described with specific details about salary increases and new responsibilities that proved completely accurate. Mark Torres heard whispers about meeting his future wife, including her name and profession, weeks before their actual encounter. Rebecca Walsh's recordings mentioned a family illness that wouldn't manifest for another year, yet the whispers described the exact diagnosis and treatment timeline that later occurred. The Geological Survey team completed their work at Devil's Backbone Ridge, but none of the members have returned to the site since their initial investigation. Dr. Chen maintains detailed personal records of their experiences, including audio recordings that continue to reveal new information each time she reviews them. The stones apparently embedded knowledge within their whispers that unfolds gradually over time, suggesting their influence extends far beyond physical boundaries, but the manipulation of time itself reaches even more disturbing extremes in other locations throughout these mountains, where entire families have discovered that hours and days lose all meaning. The Time Distortion Valley. The Henderson family's experience in an unnamed valley in eastern Kentucky demonstrates how these temporal anomalies can trap entire groups in impossible time loops. David Henderson, his wife Maria, and their 2 teenage children planned a simple weekend camping trip, expecting to spend Saturday and Sunday hiking before returning home Monday morning. They arrived at the secluded valley Friday evening and set up their tent near a small creek. According to their watches, phones, and camping clock, they spent exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes in the valley before packing up to leave. Yet all 4 family members experienced what felt like 3 complete days of activities, meals, and sleep cycles. The psychological strain began when Maria noticed the sun's position remained fixed in the sky despite their sense that entire days were passing. She observed the sun hovering at what appeared to be mid-afternoon angle throughout their entire stay, casting identical shadows that never shifted despite their feeling that they had witnessed multiple sunrises and sunsets. The family ate 9 separate meals during their 4-hour stay, sleeping through what felt like 2 full nights. Yet the natural lighting never changed from that perpetual afternoon glow. More disturbing was how family members seemed to age at different rates within the valley's boundaries. David's beard grew noticeably longer, requiring him to shave twice during what his watch claimed was a 4-hour period. His 15-year-old son, Jake, developed visible muscle definition from hiking activities that should have taken weeks to achieve. Maria's hair grew several inches, and she noticed new lines around her eyes that hadn't been present when they arrived. Their daughter, Emma, appeared unchanged, creating an unsettling dynamic where family members were experiencing time's passage differently despite sharing the same physical space. The valley has produced similar temporal distortions for other visitors who venture into its boundaries. Local resident Carl Morrison entered the valley in 1998 for what he intended as a brief afternoon hike. Morrison emerged 43 days later, according to outside observers, but insisted he had been hiking for only 20 minutes. His family had organized search parties and filed missing person reports while Morrison experienced what felt like a short walk through forest trails. Morrison's physical condition supported his timeline rather than the calendar, showing no signs of extended outdoor survival or malnutrition despite the missing weeks. Electronic equipment malfunctions in predictable patterns within the valley's temporal anomaly zone. Digital clocks run backward at varying speeds, with some devices losing hours while others gain time rapidly. Cameras capture images from different temporal periods within single frames, showing the same landscape in multiple seasons or weather conditions simultaneously. GPS devices display impossible coordinates that place users in the same valley during different decades, with some readings showing locations that won't exist for years according to planned development projects. Search and rescue operations in the valley have resulted in teams losing entire days during what should have been routine missions. Rescue workers enter the valley in full radio contact with base stations, only to emerge hours or days later with no memory of the intervening time period. These teams report completing their search assignments, yet their equipment shows evidence of extended exposure to weather conditions that didn't occur during their perceived mission duration. Several rescue units now refuse valley assignments after multiple personnel returned with unexplained gaps in their memories and physical evidence of experiences they couldn't recall. Abandoned campsites throughout the valley contain equipment and supplies that defy logical explanation. Tents from the 1970s appear freshly pitched with modern camping gear that wasn't manufactured until decades later. Coolers contain ice that hasn't melted, and food with expiration dates from both the distant past and far future. Camp stoves show recent use despite being vintage models that haven't been produced in 30 years. These sites suggest that visitors from different time periods have occupied the same physical spaces simultaneously without awareness of each other's presence. Cherokee oral traditions describe the valley as a place where time becomes trapped, unable to flow in its natural direction. According to these stories, the area was considered sacred but dangerous, a location where the spirits of past and future could interact with the present world. Cherokee elders warned that entering the valley during certain lunar phases could cause travelers to become lost in time rather than space, wandering between different periods without awareness of their displacement. The most unsettling aspect of the valley involves visitors who return with knowledge of future events. Margaret Schultz emerged from the valley in 2003, speaking about technological developments that wouldn't be announced for another 5 years. She described smartphones with specific features that didn't exist at the time, providing detailed explanations of social media platforms that were still in development. When pressed for details about how she acquired this knowledge, Schultz insisted she had learned about these technologies during normal conversations with other campers she had met in the valley. Similar cases involve individuals who return with information about personal events that haven't yet occurred in their lives. These visitors describe conversations with future versions of themselves or family members, receiving advice about decisions they haven't yet faced. Some return with lottery numbers that prove accurate weeks later, while others bring back warnings about accidents or illnesses that subsequently occur exactly as predicted. Physical evidence suggests the valley exists in multiple temporal states simultaneously, explaining why visitors experience different aspects of time distortion. The Henderson family's experience represents just one variation of the valley's temporal effects, which seem to intensify during specific atmospheric conditions and lunar phases. But the mountains hold even more intimate forms of psychological manipulation, particularly when darkness provides perfect cover for entities that know exactly which voices will compel you to abandon all rational thought. The calling voices of moonless nights. Robert Chen was hiking alone through the Daniel Boone National Forest when he heard his mother's voice calling his name from somewhere deep in the darkness ahead. His mother had died from cancer 6 months earlier, yet her voice carried clearly through the October night air with the same worried tone she had used when he stayed out too late as a teenager. The voice called out that she was lost and needed help finding her way home. Chen stopped walking and stood perfectly still, his headlamp beam cutting through the complete darkness of the new moon night. His rational mind understood that what he was hearing was impossible, but the emotional pull of his mother's distress overwhelmed his logical thinking. The voice called again, this time from a different direction, deeper into unmarked forest territory that wasn't part of any established trail system. Chen found himself taking steps toward the sound before consciously deciding to move. His mother's voice carried the exact inflection patterns he remembered from childhood, including the way she pronounced his name with a slight emphasis on the second syllable that no one else had ever replicated. She pleaded for him to hurry, explaining that she was confused and couldn't find the path back home. The emotional manipulation was perfect, targeting the guilt Chen still carried about not being present during her final moments at the hospital. Each time Chen approached the area where he thought the voice originated, it would call out from a new location, always maintaining a distance that kept the source just beyond his headlamp's range. The voice led him progressively deeper into dense forest, away from marked trails and familiar landmarks. Chen noticed that his GPS device was losing satellite signal despite the clear sky above the forest canopy. His phone showed no cellular service, cutting off his ability to contact emergency services or family members who might talk him out of following the mysterious calls. These encounters with calling voices occur exclusively during new moon phases when natural darkness reaches its most complete state. Local search and rescue coordinator Janet Morrison has documented 17 cases over the past decade of hikers reporting deceased family members calling for help during moonless nights. Morrison noted that these incidents cluster around specific calendar periods when lunar darkness coincides with seasonal atmospheric conditions that create perfect acoustics for sound transmission through forest valleys. Witnesses who experience these voice encounters report identical physical sensations that begin the moment they hear familiar voices calling from the darkness. The temperature around them drops suddenly by 15 to 20 degrees, creating visible breath clouds even during mild weather conditions. Chen described feeling as though multiple unseen entities were watching him from positions all around the forest, creating a sensation of being surrounded despite the apparent isolation of the wilderness setting. His skin felt electrically charged, with arm hair standing up as if he were near a powerful electrical field. The voices demonstrate impossible knowledge about personal family histories and private conversations that only deceased relatives could possess. Chen's mother's voice referenced arguments they had experienced years before her illness, repeating exact phrases from fights they had never resolved. She mentioned his childhood fear of thunderstorms and sang fragments of lullabies she had used to comfort him during scary nights when he was 8 years old. The voice knew about his recent job promotion and mentioned his girlfriend Sarah by name, despite his mother never having met Sarah before her death. Search teams working these missing person cases have discovered disturbing physical evidence along the routes where voices lead hikers into unmarked territory. Personal belongings from individuals who disappeared months or years earlier are scattered along these paths in patterns that suggest deliberate placement rather than accidental loss. Teams have found jewelry, watches, wallets, and identification cards for missing persons arranged at regular intervals as if marking waypoints along a planned route. These items show no signs of weather exposure despite being outdoors for extended periods. The Morrison family lost their 26-year-old son Danny to these calling voices in 1994. Danny had been camping alone near Cumberland Falls when other campers heard him talking loudly to someone in the forest around midnight. Witnesses reported hearing Danny's side of a conversation where he repeatedly said his grandmother's name and asked her to wait for him to catch up. Search teams found Danny's campsite abandoned with his gear left behind, but they never located Danny himself despite extensive search efforts covering hundreds of square miles. Similar family tragedies have occurred throughout the Appalachian region, with the Patterson family losing a daughter in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, and the Rodriguez family losing their father in Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains. Each case involved the victim being heard talking to deceased family members during new moon nights before disappearing completely. The consistency of these disappearances across different states suggests a regional phenomenon rather than isolated incidents. Appalachian oral traditions describe these entities as spirits that mimic the voices of loved ones to lure victims during moonless nights. According to these stories, certain spirits become trapped in mountain valleys after death, unable to move on to whatever comes next. These trapped souls grow desperate for human contact and learn to mimic the voices of deceased family members to trick living relatives into joining them in their eternal isolation. The traditions warn that these spirits are most active during the darkest nights when their deceptions are hardest to detect. The most troubling aspect of these encounters involves hikers who follow the voices but survive to tell their stories. These survivors are typically found days later by search teams, often miles from where they were last seen, with no memory of how they traveled such distances or what occurred during their missing time. Medical examinations reveal that these individuals show signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition consistent with days of outdoor survival, yet they insist they were only lost for a few hours. Chen managed to resist following his mother's voice deeper into the forest, but only after recognizing that the calls were leading him in circles through increasingly difficult terrain. He retraced his steps using landmarks he had mentally noted during his initial pursuit, eventually finding his way back to the marked trail system. The voice continued calling throughout his retreat, growing more desperate and angry as he moved away from the unmarked territory where it seemed most powerful. These mountain encounters demonstrate how supernatural entities exploit human emotional vulnerabilities to achieve their unknown purposes. But the manipulation extends beyond forest trails into abandoned structures where the boundary between past and present dissolves completely, creating spaces where impossible activities continue decades after they should have ended. The abandoned hospital's midnight patients. The urban exploration team, known as Silent Shadows, entered the abandoned Riverside Psychiatric Hospital in rural West Virginia, expecting to document typical decay and vandalism that plague most derelict buildings. Team members Jake Morrison, Lisa Chen, and Marcus Rodriguez had explored dozens of abandoned medical facilities throughout the Appalachian region, but Riverside immediately presented unusual conditions that set it apart from other sites. The building had been closed since 1973 following a state investigation into patient treatment practices under Dr. Harrison Blackwood, yet several areas showed clear evidence of recent medical activity that couldn't be explained by casual trespassers or homeless occupation. The first floor surgical suite contained IV bags hanging from modern stands, with a saline solution still warm to the touch despite the building lacking electrical power for over 4 decades. Surgical instruments lay arranged on metal trays with fresh sterilization marks and no signs of rust or corrosion typical in abandoned medical facilities. Patient charts scattered across nursing stations contained handwritten entries dated 20 to 30 years in the future, describing treatment protocols for medical conditions that wouldn't be identified and named until decades after the hospital's closure. The ink on these charts appeared fresh, as if someone had been writing in them recently. The team's unease escalated when they realized they could hear medical equipment operating throughout the building despite the complete absence of electrical infrastructure. Heart monitors beeped steadily from patient rooms, ventilators hummed with mechanical breathing patterns, and IV drips clicked rhythmically as they dispensed medication into empty air. These sounds echoed through hallways where ceiling tiles hung broken, and water damage had warped most surfaces beyond recognition. The contrast between audible medical activity and visible abandonment created a psychological dissonance that left team members questioning their own perceptions. Dr. Harrison Blackwood's experimental treatment methods had pushed the boundaries of accepted psychiatric practice during the hospital's operation from 1952 to 1973. State investigators documented evidence of unauthorized drug trials, surgical procedures performed without proper consent, and patient deaths that occurred under suspicious circumstances. Records showed that 47 patients died during unexplained medical episodes, with cause of death listed simply as treatment complications. Many of these deaths occurred during night shifts when minimal staff were present to witness or document the circumstances surrounding patient fatalities. The exploration team encountered figures in medical scrubs moving through hallways and patient rooms, but these figures vanished whenever team members looked directly at them. Lisa Chen described seeing nurses and doctors clearly in her peripheral vision, going about their duties with purposeful efficiency, yet when she turned to observe them directly, only empty corridors remained. The figures appeared to be checking on patients, administering medications and conducting routine medical procedures, all within rooms that contained no actual patients or functional medical equipment. These apparitions wore period-appropriate medical uniforms from the 1960s and 1970s rather than modern scrubs. Several patient rooms on the third floor remained impossibly clean and fully operational despite the building's overall state of decay. These rooms contained functioning hospital beds with fresh linens, working medical monitors displaying vital signs, and IV stands with active medication drips. The rooms maintained comfortable temperatures while the rest of the building remained cold and damp from years of weather exposure. Fluorescent lighting operated normally in these spaces while adjacent hallways remained dark and damaged. The team found no electrical source that could power these rooms or explanation for their pristine condition. Visitors to Riverside frequently develop sudden medical symptoms that match conditions treated by the hospital during its operational period. Jake Morrison experienced severe auditory hallucinations within 30 minutes of entering the building, hearing voices commanding him to take medications that hadn't been prescribed to him. Lisa Chen developed tremors in her hands and difficulty speaking clearly, symptoms consistent with patients who had undergone experimental psychiatric treatments in the facility. Marcus Rodriguez complained of intense headaches and visual disturbances that persisted for days after leaving the hospital grounds. Security guards employed by the property management company maintain regular perimeter patrols but refuse to enter the hospital building after sunset. Guard Supervisor Tom Mitchell acknowledged that his staff consistently report seeing lights moving through windows and hearing medical equipment operating inside the building during night shifts. Mitchell himself observed what appeared to be surgical procedures being performed in operating rooms, complete with bright surgical lights and multiple medical personnel. Yet when police responded to investigate these reports, they found only empty, dark rooms with no evidence of recent activity. Local residents report seeing ambulances entering the hospital grounds at midnight on a regular basis, despite the facility having no emergency services or active medical operations. These ambulances arrive without sirens or emergency lights activated, suggesting routine rather than emergency transport. Witnesses describe seeing patients being wheeled into the building on gurneys, accompanied by medical personnel in period-appropriate uniforms. Emergency services dispatch centers have no record of calls or vehicle deployments to Riverside Hospital during these sightings. The most disturbing discovery involves team members who explore the hospital and later find evidence of medical procedures they don't remember receiving. Marcus Rodriguez reported discovering fresh surgical scars on his abdomen 3 days after visiting Riverside, with professional suturing that showed no signs of infection or improper healing. The surgical site appeared to be several weeks old despite his certainty that no procedure had been performed. Lisa Chen found injection sites on her arms that she couldn't account for, along with small bandages that she didn't remember applying. Jake Morrison returned from Riverside with a medical identification bracelet attached to his wrist that he couldn't remember putting on. The bracelet contained patient information matching his personal details but listed medical conditions he didn't have and medications he wasn't taking. The bracelet appeared to be made from materials and manufacturing processes that weren't available when the hospital was operational, yet it showed signs of extended wear as if he had been wearing it for months. Who or what would keep running a ward for phantom patients? The answer may lie with families throughout these mountains who have maintained knowledge that most outsiders dismiss as mere superstition. The protective rituals that still work. These traditional practices have been passed down through generations of mountain families who understand survival in regions where conventional protection fails. Dr. Amanda Foster began her anthropological research in eastern Kentucky, expecting to document quaint folk traditions that survived from earlier centuries. Instead, she discovered that certain mountain families perform elaborate monthly rituals involving precise arrangements of salt, iron nails, and spoken prayers that follow patterns unchanged for over 200 years. The Whitman family of Harlan County demonstrated their ritual during the new moon of each month, creating geometric salt patterns around their property perimeter while placing iron railroad spikes at specific compass points. They recited prayers in a dialect that mixed English with Cherokee phrases, speaking words they had learned phonetically without understanding their original meaning. Foster's academic interest shifted to genuine concern when she researched families who had abandoned these practices within the past generation. The Morrison family stopped performing their monthly rituals in 1998 after the grandmother who maintained the tradition passed away. Within 6 months, the family experienced a series of unexplained tragedies that devastated their lives. Their teenage son died in a car accident on a straight road in perfect weather conditions. Their dairy cattle began dying from an unknown illness that veterinarians couldn't diagnose or treat. Equipment failures plagued their farm operations, with machinery breaking down in ways that defied mechanical logic in repair attempts. What distinguished these ritual practices from typical folk superstitions was the strong local correlation Foster documented between ritual maintenance and absence of supernatural encounters. She recorded dozens of families whose properties remained completely untouched by the supernatural phenomena that plagued neighboring areas throughout the Appalachian region. While nearby residents reported encounters with shadow figures, unexplained voices, and temporal distortions, families who maintained their protective rituals reported no such disturbances. Their livestock remained healthy, their equipment functioned normally, and family members reported peaceful sleep without the nightmares that affected other mountain communities. The oral histories preserved by these families contain detailed accounts of encounters with entities that demonstrate respect for specific boundaries and protective measures. The Henderson family maintained stories passed down from their great-great-grandmother about creatures that approached their property line, but refused to cross areas where salt had been properly distributed according to traditional patterns. These entities would pace along the boundaries, testing the protective barriers, but never violated the sacred spaces created by iron placement and prayer recitation. Family elders described how these creatures would howl in frustration before retreating deeper into the forest when they encountered properly maintained spiritual defenses. Physical evidence supports the correlation between ritual maintenance and reduced supernatural activity in ways that challenge conventional understanding. Properties where families maintain their ritual practices show clear boundary lines where supernatural activity appears to stop abruptly. Foster documented cases where shadow figures visible on neighboring properties become completely absent once they approach the ritual boundaries. Unexplained lights that appear regularly in surrounding forest areas fade out when they near homes protected by traditional practices. Even natural phenomena seem affected, with dangerous weather patterns consistently diverting around properties where families perform their monthly ceremonies. The correlation between ritual abandonment and family disappearances presents the most disturbing evidence for these practices' local importance. County records show that 7 families who stopped performing traditional protective rituals within the past 20 years have subsequently lost members to unexplained disappearances. The Patterson family abandoned their practices in 2003 when the father dismissed them as outdated superstitions. Their 14-year-old daughter vanished during a school trip to nearby state parks, despite being surrounded by teachers and classmates when she was last seen. Search efforts covering thousands of acres found no trace of the girl or explanation for her disappearance. Foster and other researchers who learned and implemented basic protective measures reported reduced supernatural encounters during their mountain visits. Foster herself adopted the basic protective measures after witnessing their correlation with family safety, carrying iron nails and salt during her fieldwork in areas known for paranormal activity. She reported that encounters which had previously frightened her during research trips stopped occurring once she began following the traditional protective protocols. Other researchers who adopted these practices described similar results during their visits, though the effectiveness appeared most consistent for families who maintained the traditions across generations. Local clergy throughout the Appalachian region have quietly incorporated elements of these ancient practices into modern religious services, recognizing their local importance while adapting them to contemporary Christian frameworks. Pastor William Rogers of the Harlan County Baptist Church includes prayers in his Sunday services that closely mirror the traditional protective recitations, though he presents them as standard Christian supplications rather than folk magic. Rogers acknowledged that his congregation experiences fewer of the supernatural disturbances that affect other mountain communities, attributing this protection to what he describes as enhanced spiritual warfare practices rooted in regional tradition. The The families who maintain these protective traditions serve as guardians of knowledge, essential for survival in regions where the boundary between natural and supernatural remains dangerously thin. They preserve practical information about entities and phenomena that official institutions refuse to acknowledge or study seriously. Their rituals represent generations of trial and error experimentation with methods for protecting human communities from threats that exist outside conventional understanding of reality. These families understand that their mountains contain dangers that require active management through practices their ancestors developed through direct experience with supernatural predators. These are living traditions that locals treat as necessary safety measures rather than quaint folklore. The geometric salt patterns, iron railroad spikes placed at compass points, and prayers mixing English with Cherokee phrases represent knowledge systems developed through centuries of contact with forces that most outsiders never encounter. But the mountains hold guardians far older than human families, watchers whose vigilance extends back through millennia of forest growth and whose attention focuses on anyone who ventures too close to secrets they have protected since before recorded history began. The Watchers in the Ancient Trees. Dr. Rachel Summers began studying the ancient oak groves of Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains to document tree ring patterns that might reveal climate changes over the past millennium. These massive oaks, some measuring 40 feet in circumference, displayed growth patterns that violated basic botanical principles. Ring analysis showed periods where the trees had grown rapidly during documented drought years while remaining dormant during seasons with optimal growing conditions. More puzzling, several trees showed ring patterns that indicated growth spurts occurring decades before adequate soil conditions existed in the area. The trees seemed to respond to environmental factors that hadn't yet manifested in the physical world. Dr. Summers noticed these ancient trees exhibited behaviors typically associated with mobile organisms rather than stationary plants. Individual trees would shift the orientation of their major branches over periods of days rather than seasons, following the movement of researchers through the forest. Camera traps positioned around tree clusters captured footage of branches moving to track human subjects, even when no wind was present. The trees appeared to focus their attention on specific individuals, with some people receiving intense scrutiny while others passed through the groves completely ignored. The breakthrough discovery came when Dr. Summers examined the trees during specific lighting conditions created by early morning sun filtering through mountain fog. Under these precise circumstances, bark patterns resolved into recognizable facial features complete with eyes, noses, and mouths carved naturally into the wood grain. These faces appeared on trees throughout the grove, each displaying distinct expressions that seemed to reflect awareness and intelligence. The faces became visible only when sunlight struck the bark at angles between 15 and 20 degrees, creating shadows that revealed the carved features hidden within natural wood patterns. Underground surveys revealed that the root systems of these ancient trees formed networks of unprecedented complexity that extended for miles beneath the forest floor. Ground-penetrating radar showed root connections between trees separated by distances that should have prevented any biological communication. More disturbing, these root networks pulsed with measurable electrical activity that occurred in synchronized patterns across the entire grove system. The electrical pulses registered on sensitive equipment as organized signals rather than random biological activity, though their purpose remained unclear. Wildlife behavior around these ancient groves creates zones of unnatural silence that contrast sharply with the typical sounds of healthy forest ecosystems. Birds refuse to nest in the ancient trees despite their providing ideal nesting sites with strong branches and protective canopy cover. Deer, bears, and smaller mammals consistently avoid these areas even when traveling between feeding and water sources that would normally route them through the groves. The absence of normal forest sounds creates an oppressive quiet that visitors describe as psychologically disturbing, as if the natural world recognizes these trees as fundamentally different from their surroundings. Individuals who make physical contact with these ancient trees report intense sensory experiences that overwhelm their normal perception of reality. Dr. Summers documented cases where people touching the bark experienced vivid visions of historical events that occurred centuries before their birth. These visions contain specific details about Native American ceremonies, European settler activities, and Civil War battles that later proved accurate when compared to historical records. More unsettling, some individuals reported visions of future events, including personal experiences that hadn't yet occurred but subsequently manifested exactly as seen during tree contact. Research into missing person cases throughout the Blue Ridge region revealed disturbing connections between disappearances and proximity to these ancient tree groves. County records dating back to the 1800s show that 43 individuals have vanished within 5 miles of documented ancient oak sites. These disappearances occurred during all seasons and weather conditions, affecting experienced outdoorsmen and casual hikers equally. Search efforts in these cases consistently failed to locate any trace of the missing persons despite extensive operations covering hundreds of square miles around the grove locations. Local logging operations maintain unofficial no-cut policies around certain ancient tree sites after workers witnessed phenomena that challenged their understanding of plant biology. Chainsaw operator Billy Chen described cutting into what appeared to be a normal oak tree, only to have dark red liquid pour from the cut that resembled human blood rather than tree sap. The liquid tested positive for human proteins and cellular material, despite originating from solid wood tissue. Multiple logging crews have reported similar incidents, leading to industry-wide avoidance of areas containing the ancient grove systems. Cherokee oral traditions describe these trees as watchers who maintain sacred knowledge about the mountain's supernatural inhabitants. According to these beliefs, the ancient trees serve as guardians who monitor human activity throughout the mountain system. Cherokee elders warn that disrespecting these trees or attempting to harvest them will result in supernatural retaliation that extends beyond the individual to affect entire family lines. The most disturbing phenomenon involves individuals who develop permanent changes in their visual perception after spending significant time near these ancient groves. Dr. Summers documented 12 cases where people reported seeing through multiple sets of eyes simultaneously, experiencing vision from perspectives located throughout the forest rather than from their own physical position. These individuals describe awareness of activities occurring miles away, the ability to observe their own bodies from external viewpoints, and visual access to areas they have never physically visited. This enhanced perception persists indefinitely, suggesting that contact with the ancient trees creates permanent neurological changes. If trees can remember and watch, what do they know about the things that live in the hollows? The answer may lie hidden in structures that exist throughout these mountains. Buildings that appear on no maps yet shelter those who have learned to fear what walks between the trees. The impossible structures hidden in plain sight. These refuges appear throughout the mountain wilderness, offering sanctuary to those who understand what stalks the deeper hollows. The hiking group discovered the cabin during their third day on an unmarked trail through North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest. The structure appeared suddenly between two massive oak trees, as if it had materialized from the forest itself. Sarah Mitchell, the group leader, checked their topographic maps and GPS coordinates repeatedly, but found no reference to any buildings in their location. The cabin showed clear signs of recent habitation, with smoke rising from the chimney, fresh paint on the wooden shutters, and a well-maintained garden plot beside the front porch. Yet according to every official record and survey map of the area, they were standing in uninhabited wilderness that had never contained human structures. The group's unease grew when they attempted to measure the cabin's dimensions using standard hiking equipment. The exterior walls measured roughly 20 feet by 30 feet, typical proportions for a modest mountain dwelling. However, when they knocked on the door and were invited inside by a friendly elderly man, the interior space defied the external measurements completely. The cabin contained 6 large rooms connected by hallways that stretched far beyond the building's outer boundaries. Sarah counted her steps while walking from the front door to the back of the kitchen, covering nearly 80 feet within a structure that measured 30 feet from front to back when viewed from outside. The layout became more disturbing as they explored further into the impossible interior space. Rooms connected in ways that violated basic architectural principles, with doorways leading to spaces that should have overlapped with rooms they had already visited. The bathroom contained a hallway that led to what appeared to be the same kitchen they had entered from the front door, yet this kitchen was oriented in a different direction and contained different furniture arrangements. Windows in various rooms showed views of completely different forest landscapes, as if each room existed in a separate location despite being connected by common doorways and hallways. Modern amenities throughout the cabin operated perfectly despite the complete absence of electrical lines, water pipes, or any other infrastructure that would normally supply such services. A electric lights illuminated every room with steady brightness, while a refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen, maintaining frozen items and cold beverages. Hot water flowed from bathroom and kitchen faucets without any visible water heater or plumbing connections. A television in the living room displayed current news broadcasts and modern programming, though no cables or satellite dishes were visible anywhere on or around the property. The cabin's resident introduced himself as Thomas Garrett, claiming to have lived there for 37 years after moving to the mountains from Tennessee. Garrett appeared to be in his 70s, with detailed knowledge of local wildlife patterns and weather conditions that suggested genuine long-term residence in the area. However, when the hiking group later checked county records, property deeds, and census data, they found no documentation of Thomas Garrett ever existing as a legal resident of North Carolina or any surrounding states. Utility companies had no record of service to the cabin's location, and tax records showed the area as unimproved forest land owned by the federal government. Garrett explained that the cabin served as a refuge for people fleeing what he described as persecution by entities that most people couldn't see or understand. He mentioned other residents who lived in similar structures throughout the mountains, individuals who had sought shelter from supernatural predators that hunted them in the normal world. According to Garrett, these hidden buildings provided protection from entities that couldn't follow their prey into these dimensional refuges. He showed the group photographs of former residents who had stayed at the cabin temporarily before moving on to other safe locations deeper in the mountain wilderness. The hiking group planned to leave the cabin after spending one night as Garrett's guests, but discovered that departure wasn't entirely within their control. Two group members, Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Torres, found themselves unable to remember the route they had taken to reach the cabin. Every trail they attempted led them in circles back to the front porch, despite their using compass bearings and GPS coordinates that should have guided them away from the structure. After 3 attempts to leave, Walsh and Torres simply stopped trying, settling into daily routines around the cabin as if they had always lived there. They showed no distress about their inability to leave and seemed genuinely content with their new permanent residence. Professional survey teams sent to investigate reports of impossible architecture in the Appalachian region consistently produce contradictory measurements when they encounter these structures. The Whitmore Survey Company documented a building in eastern Tennessee that measured 40 feet square from every external angle, yet contained interior floor space totaling over 3,000 square feet, according to room-by-room measurements. When surveyors attempted to create accurate blueprints of these buildings, their instruments produced readings that were mathematically impossible, showing negative distances between walls and room dimensions that exceeded the building's total exterior measurements. Similar reports of impossible architecture exist throughout the entire Appalachian mountain chain, from Georgia's Blue Ridge Peaks to Pennsylvania's Allegheny Highlands. Each region contains documented cases of buildings that violate spatial laws, while providing functional living spaces for residents who exist outside normal record-keeping systems. These structures appear most frequently in areas where other supernatural phenomena have been reported, suggesting a connection between dimensional instabilities and the architectural impossibilities that characterize these hidden refuges. What would you trade to escape something you can't leave? Some visitors, like Walsh and Torres, become permanent inhabitants of these alternate spaces, unable to return to conventional reality, even when they attempt to leave their impossible refuges. But these sanctuaries protect only those who seek shelter from the mountain's predators. Others who venture into these ancient peaks discover that the hunters can become the hunted, and that some entities possess patience that spans decades while they study their chosen prey. The night hunters who hunt the hunters. Who hunt the hunters? Carl Brennan had been hunting the same West Virginia ridges for 23 years when something began hunting him back. Brennan first noticed the stalking behavior during his November deer hunt in 2019, when he realized another presence was moving through the forest using the exact techniques he had perfected over decades of hunting experience. The entity stayed downwind of his position, moved only when natural sounds would mask its footsteps, and seemed to understand his preferred hunting locations better than he understood them himself. What disturbed Brennan most was how this unknown hunter anticipated his movements, always positioning himself where he planned to go rather than following where he had been. The psychological warfare began with the entity copying Brennan's own hunting methods and turning them against him with supernatural precision. When Brennan used deer calls to attract game, he heard identical calls investigate these calls, he found himself walking into what felt like carefully planned ambushes, with the entity always staying just beyond visual range while maintaining perfect awareness of his position and intentions. These entities demonstrate mastery of deception techniques that exceed human capabilities, using the hunter's own psychological vulnerabilities against them with devastating effectiveness. Brennan reported hearing his deceased father's voice calling his name from deep in the woods, using the same hunting signals they had developed during Brennan's childhood. The voice provided tactical advice about deer movements and weather patterns, information that proved completely accurate despite coming from an impossible source. When Brennan followed these helpful voices, he invariably found himself led into dangerous terrain or completely lost in familiar hunting areas he had navigated successfully for decades. Each entity demonstrates intimate knowledge of individual hunters' personal habits, fears, and hunting strategies that extends far beyond casual observation. Brennan's stalker knew he always checked his rifle exactly 3 times before entering hunting positions, and it would produce identical checking sounds from nearby locations, just as he completed his routine. The entity understood his preference for hunting during specific weather conditions, and would appear most frequently during the atmospheric circumstances when Brennan felt most confident and successful. It seemed to access his childhood memories about hunting trips with his father, using specific details from private family experiences to create psychological pressure that undermined his concentration and confidence. Physical evidence left by these hunting entities defies biological classification and suggests creatures that exist partially outside normal animal categories. Brennan discovered tracks that began as human boot prints but gradually transformed into animal paw marks over the span of several steps, as if the creature was shifting between human and animal forms while walking. The tracks showed claw marks that appeared and disappeared within individual footprints, suggesting appendages that could extend and retract at will. Most disturbing, the tracks sometimes showed characteristics of multiple different animals within the same trail, including bear, deer, and large cat features mixed with human elements in combinations that couldn't exist in any known species. Hunters throughout the Appalachian region report escalating encounters that continue until they abandon their traditional hunting grounds permanently, rather than risk further confrontations with these supernatural predators. Bobby Martinez hunted the same Tennessee valleys for 15 years before his encounters with these entities became so intense that he sold all his hunting equipment and moved to urban areas where he felt safer from their influence. Martinez described how the entities began leaving mutilated animal carcasses arranged in patterns around his hunting stands, creating grotesque displays that served as warnings about continuing to hunt in their territory. The psychological pressure eventually became unbearable, forcing Martinez to choose between his lifelong hunting passion and his mental stability. Professional hunting guides throughout the Appalachian region acknowledge losing clients during encounters with these supernatural hunters, though they rarely discuss these incidents publicly due to liability concerns and the impact such stories would have on their businesses. Guide services in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee have developed informal protocols for handling situations where clients disappear under circumstances that suggest supernatural rather than natural causes. These guides recognize warning signs that indicate the presence of these hunting entities and will abort trips immediately when they detect evidence of supernatural stalking activity. Appalachian folklore describes these entities as spirits who punish hunters who approach the forest without proper respect for the natural world and its inhabitants. According to these traditions, certain supernatural beings serve as guardians of animal populations, intervening when human hunting activities threaten ecological balance or violate spiritual protocols that govern the relationship between hunters and prey. These guardian spirits are said to test human hunters to determine whether they possess the wisdom and respect necessary to take animal lives responsibly, eliminating those who hunt purely for sport or personal gratification rather than sustenance and survival. Some survivors of extended encounters with these entities later reported developing intrusive predatory urges that extended beyond their original hunting targets, according to witness accounts documented in the background research. These anecdotal reports describe experiencing unusual compulsions to track and stalk other humans, feeling drawn to use their hunting skills against people rather than animals. The accounts suggest that contact with these entities may create lasting psychological changes, though these claims remain unverified personal testimonies rather than documented medical findings. The practical impact of these encounters has led to measurable changes in hunting patterns throughout the region. Local guides now sometimes refuse bookings for certain valleys, particularly during new moon periods when supernatural activity appears most intense. Multiple hunting outfitters have removed specific areas from their available territories after repeated client disappearances or encounters that left customers psychologically traumatized. The economic consequences extend beyond individual businesses, as entire hunting seasons in affected areas have seen dramatic decreases in participation rates when word spreads about supernatural encounters. These scattered incidents across hundreds of miles of mountain wilderness might seem random, but researchers have begun to identify patterns that suggest something far more systematic is occurring throughout the entire Appalachian range. The Convergence Point, where all stories meet. Dr. Patricia Williams spent 2 years mapping supernatural encounter reports throughout the Appalachian mountain system before discovering a pattern that challenged her understanding of geographic distribution. Williams, a cartographer specializing in anomaly mapping for the National Park Service, plotted over 300 documented cases of unexplained phenomena across 7 states. Her analysis revealed that every single encounter, regardless of its specific nature or location, occurred within a 40-mile radius of coordinates that couldn't be accurately mapped using standard surveying techniques. Traditional GPS systems provided different readings each time they attempted to locate this central point, while satellite imagery showed only dense forest canopy that obscured ground-level details. The coordinates themselves defied conventional mapping protocols, displaying measurement inconsistencies that suggested the location existed in multiple spatial positions simultaneously. Williams discovered that surveying equipment registered different elevations, latitudes, and longitudes depending on the atmospheric conditions and time of day when measurements were taken. During morning hours, instruments indicated the Convergence Point was located in a valley between 2 ridges. Afternoon readings placed the same coordinates on a mountain peak 3 miles away. Evening measurements suggested the location existed underground at impossible depths that would place it below sea level despite being in mountainous terrain. This dimensional instability offers a plausible working model for why encounters throughout the Appalachian region vary so dramatically in their specific characteristics while sharing common elements of supernatural activity. The Convergence Point appears to serve as a nexus where barriers between different layers of reality become permeable, allowing entities and phenomena from alternate dimensions to interact with our physical world. Shadow walkers, time distortions, calling voices, and impossible structures all seem to originate from this single location where the fundamental laws governing space and time break down under conditions that modern science cannot adequately explain or predict. Williams and other geologists noted that underground mineral deposits containing high concentrations of quartz and magnetite correlate with the electromagnetic anomalies observed around the convergence zone. These electromagnetic fields appear to intensify during certain lunar phases and atmospheric pressure changes, which may explain why supernatural encounters occur more frequently during specific weather conditions and seasonal periods throughout the mountain region. While the exact mechanism remains unclear, the correlation between geological composition and dimensional instabilities provides a framework for understanding the concentrated supernatural activity in this area. Indigenous peoples throughout the Appalachian region developed sophisticated spiritual protocols for managing the dangers posed by this dimensional convergence point centuries before European settlement. Cherokee, Creek, and Shawnee tribal leaders established elaborate systems of protective rituals, sacred boundaries, and seasonal restrictions documented in historical records. These protocols included specific routes for safe travel through the mountains, times of year when certain areas should be avoided completely, and ceremonial practices that maintain spiritual barriers between human communities and the entities that emerge from the convergence zone. Modern human encroachment on the convergence area has dramatically increased the frequency and intensity of supernatural encounters as development projects and recreational activities violate boundaries that indigenous peoples maintain through careful cultural practices. Road construction, mining operations, and recreational trail systems have brought increasing numbers of unprepared individuals into direct contact with dimensional instabilities that were previously contained through traditional protective measures. The correlation between supernatural encounter rates and human population density around the convergence point suggests that our presence somehow amplifies the dimensional disruptions that allow supernatural entities to manifest in our reality. Geological surveys of the Convergence area reveal rock formations and mineral compositions that appear anomalous according to current understanding of Appalachian mountain formation processes. Core samples contain materials that seem to have formed under pressure and temperature conditions unusual for terrestrial environments. Some mineral samples display crystalline structures that bend light in unexpected ways, while others emit low-level electromagnetic radiation in patterns that suggest organized rather than random energy discharge. These anomalous materials may serve as conduits that facilitate dimensional crossings between our reality and whatever exists beyond the convergence point. Research teams have identified comparable patterns of supernatural activity in other mountainous regions worldwide where unexplained phenomena cluster around specific geographic coordinates. Williams and her colleagues have documented similar measurement anomalies and encounter patterns in regions of Scotland's Highland Mountains, Peru's Andes Mountains, and several ranges throughout the Himalayan system. Each location exhibits similar characteristics, including indigenous protective traditions and escalating supernatural encounters that correlate with modern human encroachment on traditionally avoided areas. Archaeological evidence from sites near convergence points includes cave paintings and stone carvings depicting creatures that match modern descriptions of shadow walkers, tree watchers, and other supernatural entities reported in contemporary encounters. These ancient artistic records indicate that early human populations were aware of these beings and developed cultural practices specifically designed to avoid or appease them. The consistency of these depictions across different cultures and time periods suggests that contact with these entities has influenced human development throughout our species' history. The 8 encounters documented in this investigation fit the convergence pattern Williams identified through her mapping research. James's Midnight Stalker near Elk Ridge, the Whispering Stones of Devil's Backbone Ridge, the Henderson family's time distortion experience, Robert Chen's calling voices, the impossible medical activity at Riverside Hospital, the protective rituals that still function, the ancient tree watchers, the impossible cabin structures, and the supernatural hunters all occurred within the 40-mile radius of dimensional instability that Williams documented. Each phenomenon represents a different manifestation of the same underlying reality breakdown that characterizes this convergence zone. The diverse nature of these encounters suggests that the convergence point serves as a gateway through which multiple types of entities and phenomena can emerge into our reality. The consistency of their geographic clustering around Williams's unmappable coordinates provides the strongest evidence that these scattered incidents represent symptoms of a larger pattern of dimensional instability rather than isolated supernatural events. But these documented cases may represent only a fraction of the encounters that occur within mountain communities where such experiences are understood as part of daily reality rather than extraordinary events requiring outside investigation.
Conclusion.
These documented encounters represent multiple independent witnesses, researchers, and local traditions pointing to recurring geographically clustered anomalies throughout the Appalachian Range. The evidence demands caution and respect from anyone venturing into these ancient peaks. Heed the warnings that mountain families have preserved for generations. Follow their protective rituals and seasonal restrictions. Their ancestors learned through direct experience which boundaries must never be crossed, and when certain areas become too dangerous for human presence. If you've had your own Appalachian experiences or questions about these accounts, share them in the comments. If you appreciated this research-based approach to documented phenomena, consider liking and sharing this episode. These are the cases that reached investigators, preserved in local memory. Others remain quietly guarded in family histories for good reason. In places where people still know how to draw the salt and drive in the nail, the line between worlds grows thinner each year.